I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Welcome to this month's 30-minute skills class on drone journalism. Every month, we at NEFAC offer lessons on valuable practical skills that can be used immediately to expand your work. If you missed the class, they're all available at nefac.org/30-minute skills. Previous classes include web scraping, data visualization, how to verify information online, and how to respond to a subpoena, among many other topics. We have a lot to cover today and not a lot of time, so let's begin. Leading today's class is Mickey Osterreicher, General Counsel to the National Press Photographers Association. Mickey, all yours.
We've been working on drones and the use of drones for journalism. It's probably going on 10 years now. So people have always wanted to fly. Leonardo da Vinci sketches, a great quote from him in terms of how people just always looked up in the air and wanted to be up there. It wasn't too long before the 1700s. In France, they developed hot air balloons, and right around the same time, there was this other invention called photography, and that's one of the first known pictures that was taken with a camera obscura. It wasn't too long before somebody said, wait a minute, balloons, hot air, up in the air, cameras, I think we can take a camera up there. And so they did. This is a view of Boston. It's one of the first aerials. The first view was of Paris, but that image does not exist any longer. And then people have found all kinds of ways to put cameras up in the air with kites and pigeons, and then certainly with airplanes. And then cameras got smaller. When George Eastman developed the Brownie in the late 1800s and sold it as $1. Kind of interesting is that people thought the right to privacy as they knew it was over. Like, before that, people had to sit in a chair and hold still for these long exposures, or have really big cameras, as we saw in some of the pictures, or when Matthew Brady, traveled around in a covered wagon with all kinds of equipment. But then they thought, somebody's got a handheld camera. They can go out in the street, and the right to privacy as we know it is over. And Louis Brandeis, who was a Harvard law student, looked at things and said, let's look at the right to privacy. And the article that he wrote back in the late 1800s, if you read it now, and if you Google right to privacy, you can read it. You think he was talking about drones today, but people really hated cameras. They were worried about people taking pictures at the beach, even though people wore more to the beach back then than they wear to church today. And so again, some more aerial photography. And here we have drones and the combination of so many different technologies in terms of high definition cameras, GPS, global positioning systems, battery life. All of those things have culminated in the use of drones. So people have been flying remotely controlled aircraft for over 60 years, but it's just this kind of confluence of all these technologies coming together that got Congress to pass the FAA Modernization Act of 2012. And they really wanted to incorporate UAS, unmanned aerial systems, we call them drones, into the NAS. They love acronyms, the National Airspace, and they wanted them to do it by 2015. Well, they were about 18 months behind, but finally in 2016, they came out with the Part 107 rules. Prior to that, there were all these kinds of requirements. You actually had to have a pilot's license, a medical exam, all kinds of waivers to be able to fly a drone, but that changed with Part 107. And so what are we talking about when we're talking about drones? Well, we're gonna go through a couple of things here. They have to be below 55 pounds in weight. They have to be operated within visual line of sight. They can't be operated over 100 miles an hour. They can't be operated at an altitude higher than 400 feet above ground level. And there's an exception to that. If you're flying within 400 feet of a building, the radius of a building, you can go 400 feet above that structure, because the way it was thought is that since you have to give way to manned aircraft, if there's an aircraft flying close enough to 400 feet above the structure, it's got a whole lot more to worry about than a small drone. Yet, as I said, you must yield the right of way to other aircraft, and that you can't operate a drone in a reckless or careless manner. So the FAA has defined controlled airspace in certain classes. Class A is 18,000 up to 60,000 feet. Class G is completely uncontrolled airspace. And then there's spaces in the middle. And we could spend the whole time looking at those classes, but just know that they exist. You have to have 3 miles of visibility in order to operate. You can't operate, as I said, it's not above 400 feet, so certainly not in Class A airspace. And then you can operate in the other classes of airspace with certain air traffic control permission. In Class G airspace, which really comprises most of the country, you don't need permission, but you still can't go above 400 feet above ground level. So the FAA has all kinds of things set up. There's different classifications for being a drone pilot. You can fly recreationally, be a modeler as part of a community-based organization. You can have your Part 107 certificate as a remote pilot or commercial operator, and Part 107 basically looks at any operation that's not any one of these other operations as being commercial. You can be a public safety or government user and or an educational user. And if you go to the FAA website where you see these, you'll just click on any of them and you'll get all kinds of instructions. And there's the website that you would go to that deals with unmanned aerial systems. So please feel free to take a picture, screen capture. We may be able to share that in the chat if Justin's able to. But that's where you go to pretty much find out everything. And that information is all free. You may come up with Google searches with sites that want to charge you for information and things. Just go to the FAA. They're the source of all this, and it's all free. So what do you need to know to become an FAA pilot? And you need to understand what the rules are to be eligible to take the remote pilot's test. You have to be at least 16 years old, be able to read, write, and speak and understand English, and be in physical and mental condition to fly a UAS safely. And all drones, no matter what class they're in, need to be registered, and that costs $5, and the registration is valid for 3 years. FAA Drone Zone, another thing you can click on. Once you go to that link that we gave you before, you'll find out all kinds of things. There's an app, Know Before You Fly. Again, you can install that on your phone, and it will help you in terms of airspaces and what kinds of requirements you have for those airspace classifications. There are certain other limitations. You can't operate a drone from a moving vehicle. Operation at night, beyond visual line of sight, having a visual observer, the operation of multiple unmanned systems. These are things you need waivers for in certain situations. And so they have all those limited. Those are all links up there. Again, going to the FAA website is the best thing. We were supposed to, besides Part 107, have rules for operating over people. And that was supposed to happen a while ago. It became effective last April. One of the things that was holding that up and also holding up night flights is the fact that the government, a number of agencies, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, wanted to have remote ID. And remote ID, they're worried about people who are bad actors. They talk about the clueless, the careless, and the criminal, and they worry mostly about the criminal. So that's what they're having now in terms of remote ID. They're still trying to figure out how that's going to work and how some of the already existing drones can be retrofitted. That is not going to become effective until September of 2023. They may push that back as well. One of the things that I talk about all the time is when you're using your drone, when you're out there operating it, the person you're going to encounter first is not going to be from the FAA. They're not going to be from the NTSB. They're not going to be probably from some federal government agency. They're going to be a law enforcement officer. And so NPPA has spent a great deal of time working with law enforcement on having them understand First Amendment rights. I do a lot of training regarding the First Amendment rights of citizens and journalists to photograph and record in public. And I look at aerial photography using drones as just another extension of that. So the law enforcement folks, I've been working closely, as I said, with the FAA. They've developed this LEAP card, which tells officers who oftentimes have absolutely no knowledge about drones and what can and can't be done. It's a two-sided pocket card, and it tells them how to get the information that they need. But the thing that you need to know is that when you're operating as a Part 107, you have to have your remote pilot certificate, and you have to have your registration. And just like license and registration we all hear about when we're driving a car, same thing is true with a drone, and you have to be able to produce that. So if you're flying for a company, you need to make sure that that company has policies and guidelines, whether it's for staffers, and there are organizations such as CNN and Sinclair and USA Today, Gannett, that have a large drone fleets and use a lot of drone pilots, but they also, they and other news organizations hire freelancers. So you really need to know what requirements you must meet. And one of them is carrying enough insurance. We're just going to go through a quick list of things. Using drones, it's a federal law. Part 107 is part of federal law. The federal government can exercise what's known as preemption, as in their law applies. Unfortunately, we've seen lots and lots of states, almost at least 40 or more of them, have enacted some type of drone legislation. We've seen more legislation enacted regarding flying over or near critical infrastructure. As I mentioned, state laws, there are a lot of municipalities that have drone regulations. We just saw a case in Michigan where a local municipality tried to put one of those regulations in place. Michigan itself had a state law, and they said, hey, our state law preempted the local law, and then federal government really preempts any of that. Legal challenges, NPPA has been challenging a drone statute in the state of Texas, and that case is developing. We survived the motion to dismiss, and we've made all of the filings and waiting to see what the judge says on the motion for summary judgment. So we're seeing legal challenges to a number of these other laws take place around the country. As they said, insurance is an important thing. Ethics, we talk about legal, what you can do, what you can't do, but ethics is more what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And it's really important to have those ethical discussions. Privacy rights, that's what everybody's afraid of. That's what I talked about with the Brownie, and it's even more so with drones. NTIA, which is the National Telecommunications and Information Agency, they came up with some best practices for the use of drones. NPPA participated in those roundtable discussions, and we were able to put First Amendment considerations into place. We did the same thing with the Uniform Law Commission that was trying to develop a model tort law drone act again, and the Law Institute is working on the same thing, where there's this basically competition between First Amendment rights and people's privacy and property rights. So again, NPPA developed a drone journalism code of ethics that's available online through our website. It's nppa.org. And if you just type in, or if you just Google drone journalism code of ethics NPPA, you'll come up with it as well, because people are very much worried about drone snooping. There's the shadow of the ominous drone looking in somebody's window. My wife was kind enough to pose for this picture. But drones can really serve an incredible purpose in terms of storytelling. It really should be looked at as just another tool in the toolkit. This was a gas explosion in the Bronx, and it dropped the whole building. You really couldn't show the devastation and how that building dropped without the use of a drone. Again, a boat on fire. I don't know how close I'd get with my plastic drone because the heat certainly is intense, but it's certainly a lot safer and more economical than bringing in a fixed or rotary wing aircraft. I love this image of crocodiles. If you look on the lower left-hand side, you'll see the reflection of the drone. Again, ethics, you need to think about wildlife and whether the drone is now bothering a wildlife just as much as it might be bothering people. Another one of my favorite pictures, those look like the camels, but they're actually the shadows of the camels. And if you actually look at the little white and the red, those are the riders, but the shadows being cast by a sun that's setting. The News Media Coalition, this is a number of organizations NPPA belongs to, where we have advocated on behalf of the use of drones for news gathering. I show this. Let's see if I can actually get it to play. So talk about fake news. That would be fake news. And I can't tell you how many millions of hits this video has gotten. This is completely computer generated. That winglet of a Southwest airliner was actually filmed, but the drone striking it and it disintegrating never happened. But trying to convince people of that is something that has been a huge undertaking. A couple of other videos that have raised some concerns, and certainly those of the Department of Homeland Security. Somebody built their own drone and then attached a firearm to it. This person was actually tried in Connecticut and acquitted of that charge, but then he kind of got to another point and said, well, if I could do something with a drone, I could certainly do something with a flamethrower in terms of maybe I could cook a turkey. And while, this seems rather extreme and everybody's probably talking about, wow, that's really out there. Here's a drone, and this is taken in North Korea. And this was debris that ended up getting caught on a high power line. And rather than de-energizing the line, having people lose power, those lines are built to withstand great heat and lightning strikes. And so they thought, well, let's put up a drone and use a flamethrower and just burn the debris off. So that, in a very, very quick nutshell, is the use of drones for news gathering.
Mickey, we have a couple questions here before we wrap up. The first has to do with law enforcement. You've provided us a lot of really helpful guidance and great resources to start using drones. But assuming that we take all of that guidance and we begin using drones following every applicable law, we still may encounter some law enforcement or police officers that don't like us flying our drones around and may tell us to stop or to hand over the video that we've captured. How should we respond? What's the best way to manage a situation like that?
I have these conversations all the time. NPPA does a drone journalism leadership summit where we bring together both journalists and law enforcement and the FAA and Department of Homeland Security. And my biggest conversation is, and my biggest piece of advice is, have conversations with your local law enforcement before you fly. I can't tell you how important that is. First of all, a lot of police departments are trying to get their own drone programs. So it's really, there's that commonality. I think they'll want to talk about that, but reach out to them and tell them, look, we've got a drone program. We'd like you to introduce it, whether you are an individual independent journalist, or certainly if you are a news organization. Reach out to them, have meetings, explain what you do. And so even when you can, if you're just getting a beauty shot, you're not doing investigative journalism, you're not doing anything other than maybe getting a locator, it certainly would behoove you to call them up after you've had these conversations so they know who you are and say, hi, Channel 7, we're going to be flying at noon today over Main and Broad. We're going to be there for about 10 minutes. We're getting a locator in case you get any calls. And then when Grandma Jones calls up and says, there's a drone flying over my house, they can go, yes, Mrs. Jones, we know it's Channel 7. They'll be there about 10 minutes. You don't really have to worry. That saves them dispatching a car. It saves you from having to explain to an officer who probably has no idea about drones, but will probably order you to land. May, as Justin said, want to take the drone, seize it as evidence, all kinds of things. We've seen that happen before. The best way to avoid that is to have conversations with your local law enforcement and first responders, fire department ahead of time. So that they know, and I think that in itself will help build better police press relations. So that's my advice. The time to try to be explaining to law enforcement that you know more than they do, that almost never goes over well anyway, because they're the authority, they got the badge, the gun, and they think that they know everything when most of the time they don't.
Mickey, last question goes back to that 400-foot rule that you mentioned. Where does that 400-foot count begin? Does it take into consideration natural features like a tree line, or does it literally start right at the ground and work its way up?
It says AGL, it means AGL, above ground level. They're not taking into consideration the trees, though, I could make an argument that as long as they've got the exemption there for a structure, that let's say you've got an aerial tower that's up, a broadcast tower, and somebody's doing a tower inspection. What that allows them to do is, as long as they're within that 400-foot radius of the tower, they can go 400 feet above it. I think you could probably make the argument, if you're flying 400 feet above the trees, if there's a manned aircraft that's that close to you, they got a whole lot more to worry about than hitting the drone. They have to worry about hitting the trees. You still have to yield the right of way to them, but the way the rule is written with the FAA, it's 400 feet above ground level.
Thank you so much, Mickey, and thanks to all of you who joined us today. If you found what was taught here valuable, please consider supporting this program with a donation at nfac.org. Or better yet, become a sustaining member at nfac.org/join. Help us continue to provide this type of programming free as a public service. Thank you all again for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you all next month for our next 30-minute skills.